Jean Kennedy-Smith talks about her time as ambassador to Ireland and being the sister of JFK, but now the legacy of a man who saw the sky as no limit.
My father used to have an expression that the best steel goes through the hottest fire. You'll never have character, my son, without pain.
He was kind of a frightening kind of figure. Whatever task it was, I just got it thrown at me.
The only way to deal with Tony was to row with him. My role was the kind of sweeper-upper and the bagman.
He drove things to the edge all the time.
I think he was a visionary.
Your loyalty was expected 100%, 24/7, but at the same time, you know, the rewards were there.
I'd never deny greed. I think if you're ambitious, you're always a little bit greedy.
One of the things he said to me, a lot of people will remember me as a bastard. And he said, and I was a bastard, but I needed to be, to get everything done. And he did get a lot done.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're now making our approach to Dublin Airport. Please fasten your seatbelts and no further smoking until you're inside the terminal building.
This is the story of Tony Ryan's legacy. He was the man behind Ryanair. He revolutionised aircraft leasing with his company GPA.
He was the first Irish business guy after Arthur Guinness to look at the world as one marketplace.
He grew up in Thurles, the son of a train driver who really gave kids like me who were growing up in the 70s and 80s something to aspire to.
Yet his tale of success, glamour and trailblazing began quite humbly in a Limerick railway cottage.
Tony was born in the middle of the big snowstorm in 1936, and they were waiting for this cot. And everything got blocked, the roads, the railway lines, no cot. Mother improvised, and she put him in the top drawer. And as I said, he's top drawer ever since. We were living in rented accommodation, and it was just 2 rooms, and there were 7 of us, 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and a dog. It was pretty cramped. So I was sent to bed first. Simon would come up, move me, then Tony would come up and I'd be moved to the head of the bed. And I think that's why Tony in later life wanted big houses with big rooms, so he didn't have to go through all that. He remembered all that stuff, I think. My father probably at the time had a reasonable job, being an engine driver. Big man, 6'2", he had to have his overalls changed, he'd wear them once. And then on Sunday he would dress up in his suit, walk around the kitchen and say, look at me, children, what a fine cut of a man am I. And he was very hard working. And I think that ethos spread to everybody, I think, in the family.
His father had his breakfast in the engine and the loco. They used to put in the big long shovel for the fire. They used to fry rashers and eggs in it.
And they were very exposed, like in winter time, they were very exposed, like, because the engine wasn't properly covered, do you know?
Tony, I think he had that tough streak in him, and I'd say probably the catalyst was my father dying at a very young age. He had a heart attack. He was clear to go back to work, went back to the station on his bicycle, didn't feel well, and was cycling back from the station and collapsed and died. He was 54. Tony grew up very quickly. He'd become breadwinner, look after the family, and he became like the big brother, the real big brother, really, I think, to all of us.
In Ireland of the 1950s, many school leavers were swept abroad on a tide of emigration. But Tony got lucky. In 1955, he landed a job as a clerk in Shannon Airport. He was 19.
He was a counter-jumper. The name comes literally from being the guy who would haul the suitcase up and over the counter so that it would be taken away onto the aeroplane.
On his first day at Aer Lingus, Tony struck up a friendship with Christy Ryan. They had a lot in common.
There's Tony there and Christy there. Instant friends. And they used to go around on scooters together, back and forth to the airport. They were young 19-year-olds at the start of their career. They were buddies. They liked the horses and they liked the hurling, and they were just very close.
At the age of 22, Tony married his childhood sweetheart, Mairead Ryan.
Christy was Tony's groomsman, so there's Mairead in the centre looking quite glamorous. I met Mairead while I was working for Aer Lingus. I just asked her, could I get her a drink or whatever, and she said she'd have a Campari. She left a lasting impression. She was a very glamorous lady.
Tony and Christy developed the relationship further as they worked together over the years, moving from clerks in the airline up into more senior management roles of responsibility in Ireland and the UK.
So they sort of followed each other in their career paths around the world.
The 1960s were a boom time for international travel. In an exciting move, Tony jetted to New York to a new job as Aer Lingus station manager. It was 1968. Mairead and sons Cathal and Declan followed.
Tony recognised that to go to the United States, this was a real opportunity for him to prove himself in Aer Lingus. He dithered about whether to go, but ultimately I think that he put the ambition within Aer Lingus above any lingering concerns that perhaps the family may have had.
In 1972, Tony returned to Shannon. He was 36. Hard work had led him to middle management. Then opportunity knocked, a chance that would change Tony's life and aviation globally. Aer Lingus had a problem. Off-season, planes were lying idle, losing money. Tony's challenge was to rent them to other airlines around the world.
His big breakthrough came when he was able to lease out 2 jumbo jets to an airline in Thailand. It effectively, within Aer Lingus, made him appear to be the man who could get things done, someone with an entrepreneurial spirit, an ability to do the impossible. He pretty much felt that he'd reached the end of the line with Aer Lingus and said that he was setting up his own airline leasing business.
Tony set up a company to do just that. He remortgaged his home, invested £5,000 and became chief executive. Aer Lingus and investment bank Guinness Peat put in money. GPA was born in Shannon. In the 1970s, Shannon wasn't the obvious place to base an aircraft leasing company. Never mind global uncertainty and an oil crisis, just making a phone call was difficult.
The telephones were, some of them were windy handles, okay, and ladies sticking things into the wall. You couldn't get a telephone, actually, was the first problem. The roads were absolutely diabolical. Trying to build an international business out of Shannon was difficult. But Tony had this ambition, and he was determined to make it successful.
Tony had huge ambitions for GPA. His close-knit team included his old friend, Christy Ryan. Tony's dream was for a high-tech, global business that hired the best in the world.
Living in New York, I used to buy the Irish Times. One day, I saw there was an ad in the paper, GPA Group PLC, and the ad simply stated, wanted rocket scientists. Aircraft are very sexy assets, and I thought I'd apply to the job.
It really struck you when you first joined the company how, much care had been taken developing the logo, the letterheads on all the paperwork. We were dealing with world players. We had to measure up to their standards. And Tony was hugely proud of his brand.
We were really trying to bring the story of operating leasing to the aviation community as a whole, and this seemed to be a way of transmitting quality
There's a fantastic photograph of him there as well.
That's in the inner sanctum in his lovely pine-clad office at GPA House.
He had our brochure printed in gold, and he liked Gucci shoes and Gucci belts and so forth. And really what he was saying is, you know, money is good, make money.
He had this trading floor which looked a little bit like the Starship Enterprise. 3 TV screens, one right in front of Tony and the other 2 off to the side. So no matter where you were sitting in the room, you had full view of the screen.
My job on the trading floor was to collect all of the input from the marketing executives around the company and then have it projected on screen, ready for the Monday meeting at 8:30, and make sure that I didn't get that wrong.
There was one absolute, and that was that all of us had to be present for the 8:30 meeting on a Monday morning.
They were rather scary events.
There was this electric feel in the air. If you'd just done a deal, that was great. If in any way you were found to be failing, it could be quite excoriating.
Anybody who was actually there will tell you that the worst thing that could happen would be Tony Ryan would just simply lift his eyes and look at you with utter contempt.
When you were the recipient of that glance, you knew he was displeased. Yeah, you didn't like to be in the spotlight.
So he was looking for guys who would bring home the bacon, as we used to call it back then.
In 1982, a young Dennis O'Brien was working in a bank. He wrote to Tony Ryan looking for a job.
I met him one day. It was very formal. And I have to say, he wasn't very friendly. And he was kind of a frightening kind of figure. And much to my surprise, I got offered a job straight away for £10,000 per annum. He was a ferocious guy for lists. His sub-lists were my lists. And even when you knocked out the most difficult tasks, he'd say, OK, next. My first task was to build up a dairy farm. He said, I want you to go and buy 82 cows. And he wanted them to be 800-gallon cows, in other words, you know, high-producing cows. And he had a budget. Well, I mean, I was a city slicker. When we had the cows, then he used to cross-examine me on every cow, how much they produced. So the cows were all numbered and coded. And he'd want that level of detail. He had a digital brain before anybody.
There was a joke that he could calculate faster than Peter Ledbetter could calculate on his
HP-12C.
His HP-12C.
He had a very strong sense that real commitment to a company involved being around. It wasn't just simply about travelling the world, doing deals, being on the end of a telephone. He wanted you back every week in Shannon for the Monday morning meeting so that he could look you in the eye.
In the early 1980s, the Shannon area was an economic desert. Tony's executives stood out. They had money and they weren't afraid to flaunt it.
All of the senior management obviously had smart cars. That would have stood out in Shannon, in the west of Ireland. I'm not sure the locals particularly loved us.
Well, they would have stood out by the houses that they bought and maybe by the cars they drove, but they didn't stick out other than that because they were never around. They were always travelling.
You could go anywhere from anywhere. In other words, you might be in Karachi and somebody will ring up and say, we need you in Riyadh. From there, they may say, well, you're the closest person to Namibia.
Lithuania, into Poland, Hungary, Romania.
We were all over South America, Philippines, we were in Indonesia.
Into Bulgaria, and Bulgaria back up to Serbia, leasing aircraft.
At first, the Filipinos thought it an ugly duckling. For Guinness Pete, it's more business.
GPA had been the company that first put in aircraft into Russia from the West and into China.
It was a lot of work. It was very grueling. I remember one trip, I had just arrived home from being in South America for 2 weeks. I got in on a Saturday morning, wife and 2 daughters, got a phone call from Niall Green to say I needed to be in Singapore. And I remember waking up on Monday morning in Singapore and not just asking where I was, but asking who I was. I was just shell-shocked. into the shower, off to work and do the deals.
You had to be able to go to sleep on an aircraft. I used to look like some sort of jet-set dosser. I'd know exactly where I needed the pillows and what meals I didn't want and what I did want, and you just built your life around that.
And it didn't matter whether it was Christmas, Easter, weddings, christenings or whatever. One of the senior executives got hepatitis in Nigeria and he came home to recuperate, and Tony sent him back the next day because the deal wasn't closed. So he had this kind of relentless management. Everything had to be done quickly. Half new executives probably left within 6 months.
I don't think there's any written rule in the building that people have to work extraordinarily hard. I think they do it of their own volition. They enjoy the challenge and they get on with the job.
For myself, it resulted in a marital breakup, which wasn't good, but it did have an effect on the families, for sure.
Including Tony and Mairead, who had separated. By this time, they'd 3 sons. GPA soaked up Tony's energy. The aviation market was booming with customers eager to hire aircraft. But success came at a price.
When somebody is not at home very much, inevitably tensions arise. Tony Ryan loved Mairead all his life. It just turned out that they weren't able to live with each other.
Tony was living in Kilboy House, a stately home on 350 acres in County Tipperary. It marked the beginning of an interest in architecture.
Tony probably went out on a limb to buy it. It was like a bungalow in many respects over a basement, but it was very grand.
A typical GPA party in the late 1980s would have been at Kilboy. He had the annual barbecue and he invited all the staff.
I remember sitting around in Kilboy in front of the fireplace in his kitchen and walking the fields and looking at the cattle. His mother and sister would come from Florida and Tony would ring Christy up and say, come on, we'll go for dinner. We always had lovely family dinners. I have very fond memories of those early days.
Tony never had an opportunity to attend college, but he received a number of honorary doctorates. He supported universities with large donations and sponsored music, art and literature awards.
So, can we have your result, please?
John McGarren's novel, Amongst Women.
John, will you come forward, and Dr. Tony Ryan, would you come forward, please? And I trust you have a cheque there.
Yes, sir.
Like a lot of people who haven't been to university, he was self-conscious about the range and depth of his knowledge. And I think that self-consciousness made him reluctant to expose himself to the media and to the general public.
Tony began a relationship with Miranda Guinness, the former Countess of Ivy. She was a society queen who had married into the brewery dynasty.
It's often said that Miranda Guinness taught Tony Ryan taste. I don't think that's quite true, but what she was able to do was to refine that taste to help him in the kinds of choices that he made in buying art and furniture. It was that kind of combination of love but also shared passions.
GPA made Tony wealthy. His life was followed in the newspapers. Then he bought one.
I think Tony felt himself in competition with Tony O'Reilly for status. The prospect of being a controller of a newspaper was attractive to him.
Tony, put in about 650,000 to relaunch the business in 1983. The first couple of months went great. And then Vincent, in Tony's eyes, was a little bit too pro-IRA. I'm not sure if Tony was completely fair about that. And also the circulation figures were not going as well. And then Tony had particular views about the newspaper, that it wasn't high quality enough.
Principal difficulty I experienced with him was that he would delay transfer of a tranche of investment in order to put pressure on, not so much to achieve anything, but just he thought that that was the best way of ensuring that things were cut to the bone, and there were a number of heated meetings arising from that. But I ended up calling him a liar, and he said that nobody called him a liar, and I called him a liar again, and he stood up and with his fists up called me a liar again, and I stood up. I anticipated that there would be physical confrontation, but there wasn't. There was a board meeting called, and the meeting was going on in its familiar shambolic manner when out of the blue Eugene O'Neill said, I propose that Vincent Browne be fired as editor. And Tony, always a man for upping the ante, said, and I'm saying as financier, I'm not giving it any more money. And he was standing at the top of the table beside the door waiting for me to make my way up to the door, and he had his fists up again. And he got out of control, and instead of hitting me, he glanced the Nobel Peace Prize winner, 86-year-old Sean McBride. Sean was always a bit of a diva, and Sean went down spectacularly. People rushed in to see this 86-year-old man on the floor and Tony standing over him, but I was certainly going to bail him out.
Eventually they kind of, after a few months, settled up and Tony exited the Sunday Tribune.
He had fantastic abilities to start things, you know, to see opportunities and all that, but he was a bad person to run things.
Newspapers had been an expensive misadventure. Aviation was what Tony knew best. GPA was about to move up a gear.
From its base in Shannon, GPA has become the world's largest aircraft leasing company. Today's deal, which substantially enlarges GPA's fleet, is designed to meet what it believes will be increasing demand for aircraft.
It's the largest jet order or aircraft order ever.
And where does it position GPA in the aircraft leasing market?
I must say this now as humbly as I can, but we'll be about 3 times our largest competitor.
Buying almost all the planes available required vast sums. To raise that, Tony planned a stock market flotation or IPO for 1992. It could make many GPA staff and its star-studded board millionaires.
It was like the Manchester United team of Alex Ferguson. They just kept winning. To be fair, Tony always shared the spoils, and people in GPA made an awful lot of money.
Everybody was encouraged to buy shares and take out loans. So everybody in the company, from the most junior secretary and receptionist to Tony, did buy shares in the expectation that the IPO was going to be a success. So there was huge excitement.
This was day 32 of Operation Desert Storm.
It was a clear signal to Saddam Hussein, promised by President Bush.
The Gulf crisis and the slowdown in the British and American economies are having a serious effect on air traffic.
Whilst most of the staff were very bullish about the IPO, some were negative. The macro picture was not looking good. A recession in the States, the Gulf War, people literally stopped flying. On the micro level, we had aircraft on ground, AOG as we called them, customers that weren't paying their rentals.
Some of our existing lessees were now starting to owe us large amounts of money. So I was doing an awful lot of bailiff work as well as trying to market new aircraft.
Ironically, the moment when GPA decides it is going to go for the flotation is almost at the worst possible time.
Tony expected to make hundreds of millions from the stock market flotation. He moved his tax residency to Monaco, but trouble was brewing. Tony insisted on selling GPA shares at a high price. Investors weren't willing to pay. Tony wouldn't budge.
There was a lot of tension, but for most people, they were optimistic that the IPO would succeed.
Things will turn out okay. Everybody else, he assumes, is simply being too negative, being too pessimistic.
This morning, Dr. Tony Ryan's dream of having the largest Irish company quoted on the stock exchange turned into a nightmare.
At the morning meeting, Patrick Blaney just announced that the IPO had been aborted.
The GPA tried to raise more than $800 million. The executives were unsuccessful in convincing investors of the company's ability to maintain growth in difficult trading conditions.
Within minutes, the meeting came to an abrupt end and executives started running. Some of them ran right to the bank to try and undo deals that they had structured in the previous days.
I remember being in Milan and I remember receiving a call from my boss. It was a rather short statement. It was, I'm very sorry to tell you, Jane, the IPO has failed. Shock, disappointment, disbelief?
My own belief is that actually the price was set too high. They bought the story, but not at the price that they were trying to float GPA at. If the big players say, we think it's too expensive, then all the other sheep turn around too, and they run for the gate.
In the United States, when the chips fell on the night, we didn't raise $1 single. The flotation was a travesty.
GPA collapsed spectacularly. US giant General Electric saw an opportunity and bought the company for a song. Instead of making a fortune, Tony owed $35 million to Wall Street bank Merrill Lynch.
A lot of people had taken on debt that they otherwise wouldn't have taken on. Some of the more senior guys and more knowledgeable guys did what they call non-recourse type loans, but the younger members of the staff and people like secretaries weren't as sophisticated, and they took on loans that they were fully obliged to pay.
I remember sitting down with my calculator working out, oh my God, how much do I owe the bank? Oh my God, how am I going to pay the bank back? How many years of salary and bonus is it going to take me to pay that off? I can't pay that off.
Emotionally, I certainly spent a year that was very depressing because we had lost something which we shouldn't have lost.
How did it go wrong, Tony?
I think at the end of the day, there's only one person to blame if something goes wrong in the company, that's the boss.
And do you reject completely the idea that it was greed, vaunting ambition, hubris, which brought about this situation?
I'd never deny greed. I think if you're ambitious, you're always a little bit greedy. I don't think we were driven by greed. I think we were driven by tremendous pride in our company, tremendous money.
He is in a very low place. He's treated by people that he thought were friends in a cavalier way. They simply disappear into the woodwork.
We've lost credibility. And when you lose credibility in any aspect of life, you have to fight hard to regain it.
But the crash brings out the best in Tony Ryan, that he's going to come back.
So you reckon you're sanguine about the future? You reckon it will come right and we'll see it?
For sure.
For sure. For sure. Okay. What do you want?
He actually kind of took it on the chin. He didn't go into any black hole. And what he created a second time round ultimately became much more valuable. So he kind of came again, which to me was the most brilliant maneuver that he did.
In 1992, Tony Ryan's dreams of an aviation empire lay in tatters. He had gone from GPA hero to stock market zero. He was 56 and he had debts of $35 million he couldn't repay. Ryanair, the airline which he had been keeping afloat with spare cash, was struggling. It had slashed 2/3 of its routes.
A party of VIPs, including the Mayor of Waterford, boarded the 15-seater turboprop plane for the inaugural flight of the new service.
Ryanair was started in 1985 by Tony, travel entrepreneur Liam Lonergan, and Tony's old friend Christy Ryan. Their goal? To open Irish skies.
My father kind of formulated an idea of taking on the duopoly of British Airways and Aer Lingus across the Irish Sea. Tony agreed that my father would set up operations for the airline. So he was the first general manager of Ryanair. And he, in fact, took Cathal and Declan under his wing and mentored them.
This was a family investment. I had 3 sons. I wanted them to enjoy some of the magic of aviation that I've enjoyed over the years. And I put up money for them. But I didn't want to become involved in a day-to-day business.
It was Tony as a silent partner, and my father was the man on the ground, really.
And this is the original Ryanair reservations book. The first passenger was Mr. Albert Ellis, probably first paying passenger, I would think. It was so simple compared to the way it is now. The Ryanair camper van It was used, I'd say, mainly for promotional purposes, but we did 10-minute pleasure flights over Tramore Bay and back again. And I was selling tickets out the back window of the van while the two children were inside eating ice creams. We were so involved in the whole process. It was sort of a family thing, and we got to be known as the face of Ryanair down here. So we were asked to do a lot of things as far as Ryanair publicity would go. Christy was very loyal. Tony trusted him implicitly. He worked 16, 17-hour days. It was a hard slog. It affected our family because we didn't see much of him. He lived and breathed Ryanair. He thought it was his baby.
Ryanair is aimed at businessmen willing to pay £198 return, as against the £210 for what Ryanair says is the equivalent type ticket offered by the major airlines on the Dublin-London run.
At that time, and it included Aer Lingus, European air transport was a uniquely anti-competitive cartel cooked up by national airlines which fleeced those who were travelling on them. None of them wanted liberalisation, and Tony Ryan saw through this.
Tony decided to go under the radar. He was very clever. Start small, get your foot in the door, and then build on that.
Dennis O'Brien left his job as Tony's PA in 1988. Soon afterwards, Ryan was on the hunt for a new financial whiz kid.
He was an accountant and came down to do the accounts with a senior partner, and I was very impressed by this bright young man and tried to recruit him.
The partner in KPMG at the time, who was a great guy called Jerry McAvoy, said, no, you can't poach him. And then when I had gone off to conquer the world, buy my first newsagents in Walkinstown.
Well, I called him one morning at 5:45, winter's morning and raining and black. And I said, I envied the big queues outside your shop this morning.
He approached me and said, do you want to come work for me? To which I said, no, I'm running my own empire here in Walkinstown, and therefore you can't afford me.
Anyway, we met on the following Tuesday and we put a deal together, and that was the beginning of the beginning.
PA was a more exalted title than it actually warranted. My role was the kind of sweeper upper, the cleaner upper, and the bagman.
O'Leary soon sorted out Ryan's substantial GPA debts. He negotiated a large write-down on his borrowings to give Tony a fresh start.
It was a traumatic period for him. It was the first time he was dealing with kind of failure writ large. He was getting most of the blame, and you had the banks chasing after him, and he handled it magnificently.
O'Leary initially worked behind the scenes at Ryanair. Then in 1994, he was made chief executive. He discreetly sealed the deal with an extraordinary package, securing 1/4 of Ryanair profits, over £2 million.
Tony had, his sons Cathal and Declan involved in the running of the airline. But it was very difficult for those guys, when they would go home at the weekend, and their father was Dr. Tony Ryan, legendary international businessman. So it was easier for me, I think, to tell Tony, you're wrong. You don't like it, I'm out of here, I'll walk. And therefore I had a more arm's length relationship where I was able to persuade him that things needed to change.
If you want to be more certain of arriving on time,
the time Ryanair was worthless.
If you'd like to fly to the most modern airport in the world.
Back in the mid-1980s, Tony got a dividend from GPA of about £7 million at that, real money. And it all went into this black hole that was Ryanair, which was being run the way Tony wanted it. I mean, he was flying around the Concorde all the time and thought everybody should be showing up on Ryanair, receiving cocoa, silver pens, being treated elegantly and dignified duvets and all the rest of it. Whereas in reality, it was a Romanian BAC 111 and couldn't provide Concorde-level services at Ryanair prices.
Welcome to London Stansted.
I said, look, close it down. You're never going to make money here. To be fair, he said, no, we won't close it down. Go and have a look at Southwest in the States.
At Southwest Airlines, we want our passengers to spend their time in the air, not on the ground.
That's why we invented the 10-minute turnaround.
Herb Kelleher was the founder of Southwest Airlines, and he developed the model of no-frills, low-cost air travel that Tony Ryan recognised there had to be an opportunity with deregulation in Europe to do something that would look like a Southwest for Europe.
The quicker you're in the air, the quicker you get where you're going.
Michael O'Leary goes down to Southwest, and it really is the Road of Damascus moment.
You're gonna love our Southwest spirit.
Everything becomes clear.
This could work. We could really make Ryanair the first European low-fares airline. And to be fair to him, partly because he didn't want to put any more money into it, he said, fine, go ahead and do what you want.
Rather than listen to chief executives' bullshit, we would far rather allow our airfares do the talking. So,
if you were prepared to be somewhat controversial, you could generate acres and acres of free publicity, and it saved you millions in advertising budgets that we frankly didn't have.
Publicity came from taking on anyone seen as standing in Ryanair's way, even its own staff.
Since the company's formation, the management philosophy at Ryanair has been that since all the employees are shareholders, they don't need trade unions.
We're here in solidarity with the 39 people who are in dispute with Ryanair.
We're staying here until this is sorted out.
Consequently, all our Ryanair flights from Dublin have been cancelled.
Ryanair Airlines are withdrawing the facility for us to fly.
Ryanair was criticised for treating passengers with disdain. That, it said, was the price of low fares. Some believed O'Leary went to extremes.
Bob Ross took Ryanair to court after they charged him £18 for the use of a wheelchair at Stansted. But in the meantime, they're making all passengers pay an extra 70 cents to cover the cost of providing wheelchairs.
The bad PR sold as many seats as the good PR.
Ryanair's Michael O'Leary was in full Santa costume today for the announcement of 18 new routes from Dublin to destinations across Europe.
And so I have adopted that cartoon, clown, villain, whatever else it is.
This time, however, the Ryanair boss seems to have raised the stakes with a particularly detailed and bitter attack on Bertie Ahern and his government.
If he was in the education stream, he'd be up for bullying, but there's one person he won't bully, that's me.
The Taoiseach dithers, delays, fudges. For 2 years, we still can't get competition introduced instead of this monopoly.
The case against the government for a competing terminal at Dublin Airport will continue.
Ryanair believes Aer Lingus is panicking because it has landed a greater share of the market on all British routes.
Chairman Dr. Tony Ryan said Ryanair is now assessing its future plans.
He was quite happy with the results and the profits it generated, but Tony never really liked the low fares model. Why does it have to be so cheap? Can we not make it more elegant? Can you not make it more stylish? And it was no. The only way to deal with Tony was to row with him. We had two fairly strong personalities, but I knew what I was doing. I wasn't about to kind of listen to Tony telling me we need to be loved. I said, we don't need to be loved. We just need to be much cheaper than every other airline.
By 1997, Ryanair focused only on profit-making routes. The business model was refined and taking off. Passenger numbers doubled to 3 million in 2 years. Then, Michael and Tony hatched a new stock market plan.
Banking on a more successful flotation than GPA in the early 90s, Ryanair says this flotation will value the company at between £260 million and £308 million.
Tony's objective was Ryanair because he knew that was the last card that he had to play, and he went to that casino and put everything on black.
The sharp rise in value of Ryanair shares within minutes of opening on the Nasdaq index caught even the most optimistic by surprise.
The flotation of Ryanair at the time was driven more in the United States, where the US had Southwest Airlines. Yeah, this will be a Southwest in Europe. Yeah, we'll buy that, that'll work. And it was one of the great flotation success stories. Again, because the Ryans didn't argue over the share price.
I can remember Michael doing a presentation. I was there in Connecticut And when we'd finished, the potential investor said, "That was as slick as pigs on ice." And I just laughed and thought, that's a good phrase. And we got into the car to drive to LaGuardia Airport. Telephone rang, and the man said, "I will buy every dollar of stock you can give me." And we were 20 times oversubscribed.
Tony Ryan and his family saw the value of their 35% stake go from £100 million to £132 million, and all in the space of just 10 minutes.
He reinvented himself again because he was always an unbelievable entrepreneur, and he became a second unbelievable entrepreneur.
Obviously, Tony Ryan enjoyed the best of being a very wealthy man. He had houses in beautiful places, fine art. He enjoyed going to his tailor, having a beautifully made suit, and so on.
Louise Kennedy from Perlis, County Tipperary.
Another one of Tony's partners who was every inch Tony Ryan's equal was Louise Kennedy, the fashion designer, internationally successful. I think it would be fair to say that they really were a power couple.
Louise Kennedy.
In other ways, though, he had very simple tastes. He'd rather have a fry than he would have a kind of a big banquet.
It was a big contradiction, to be honest with you, because he was extremely well off. You know, he's probably the wealthiest person in the country. He bought a plane, a Challenger 604, and then he wouldn't use it. Like, he would fly commercial to London instead of taking his own plane because, well, I'm only going on my own and I can go on Ryanair for 20 quid. I'm not going to use my own plane.
It was great fun. Well, going on holiday, Tony was very special.
Why?
Well, typically you'd go to nice resorts or to maybe his house in Ibiza. He was good company. He was very, very good company. You know, Tony was an early riser. Tony would get by on about 4 or 5 hours sleep a night. So before everybody was out of bed, Tony was up doing the work. So when you got down for breakfast, he was chilled out, but he already had 3 or 4 hours under the belt.
By this time, Tony was pouring money into his home Lyons in County Kildare.
Lyons was Tony Ryan's great consuming passion for the last period of his life. Lyons Estate is a beautiful Georgian house, but it was in a completely dilapidated state.
It took him 5 years to restore Lyons, and he just brought it back to its former glory.
In 2000, Tony hired investment manager Richard Strapp, who worked with him on Lyons.
I knew all the stories, you know, that he was very tough and everything that goes with that. So I was excited, but it was, you know, somewhat nervous. One of the ambitions for Dr. Ryan was to recreate the village that was here, and he wanted life, activity. And what you see here today is very much that. It's a living, working, thriving business. This is one of the key pieces in terms of what Dr. Ryan has created. It's a Turner glasshouse, first of all, a Richard Turner. Dr. Ryan bought the frame for this over 20 years ago, before the village, before he knew he would even have a village. Materials came from everywhere. We have furniture from Poland, stone from the Czech Republic, from Tipperary, granite slate from Switzerland, salvage from Paris. We previously bought an entire salvage yard. We've got the fireplaces, these stunning, stunning fireplaces, he built rooms around fireplaces, most of which came from Normandy, and maybe 20 fireplaces he purchased. Everything you see here is from him buying just a beautiful piece of salvage and then working from there out. There's the oversized lampshade. It's perfect, Dr. Ryan. You know, big style, oversized, big statement. It wasn't a stately home feel. It was actually felt like his home. It was funny because you could be there getting given out to yourself, or you could be witnessing usually someone else getting absolutely murdered. And one of the grandkids might arrive and it would just change the demeanor completely, and you know, there'd be someone sitting on his lap, so it was great. It was because You wouldn't see that Dr. Ryan until that door opened like that.
But not all relationships were harmonious. There was a falling out with old friend Christy Ryan. Christy had sold up and left Ryanair, but there was a dispute over shares.
He was just completely written out of the history of Ryanair. He worked very hard and he had lots of good ideas, and he wasn't really given much credit for any of it. It pained him.
I mean, there was an awful lot of people who seemed to have been involved in the original foundation of Ryanair. And, you know, many more people. It's almost the same number of people who were in the GPO in 1916. There's about 15 or 20 different founders of Ryanair that I've come across. You know, I don't in any way diminish whatever credit is due to the people who were involved in the original founding of Ryanair. But ultimately what they found, it didn't work. It was only when the Ryan family put in 20 million, Seamus Brennan, to his eternal credit, came up with a 2-airline policy, and Ryanair took off from there.
In latter years, around 2000, my family did receive some money from the Ryan family, but nothing in the realms of the massive bonanza that Ryanair had become.
In 2006, Tony was diagnosed with terminal cancer.
He handled his cancer diagnosis with incredible courage and dignity. Almost as soon as he got the diagnosis, he was slated to talk to Marion Finucane. I defy anybody to listen to it and to hear even the hint of any kind of trouble in his life.
We found 5 more houses in the last 12 months, which are literally under our noses, little cottages with beds left. And we're going to restore those in the coming year.
The cancer diagnosis came as a shock to him because his father had died of a heart attack at a very young age, partly through overwork. And I think that Tony Ryan expected that he would be hit in the same kind of way. I don't think he really anticipated more lingering death through cancer.
But he was still working away. The foreman used to come up, he'd call him up to find out what was going on with the village. He was still plotting, he was still planning.
He saw it as his job to always instill humour into the situation, so that almost on his deathbed, he had what he described as the exit interview.
And he was bringing in all his family and friends for his final farewell. And one of the things he said to me, he said, you know, Jerry, a lot of people will remember me as a bastard. And he said, and I was a bastard, but I needed to be, to get everything done. And he did get a lot done.
He said he was going to a better place. And the grandson turned around and said, Grandad, you mean there's somewhere better than Lions?
As everyone was leaving, Tony appearing on the balcony at Lions and delivering a kind of papal benediction to everyone gathered beneath him. Tony's last partner was Martine Head, and she was the partner who was there during his last illness. Everybody recognised the incredible compassion that she showed during those last few months.
He was shouting at his right-hand man, Derek, the great fella, to get the helicopter ready because I was going to go up in the helicopter and fly around because he wanted me to see it from the air. Then I came back down and then a dinner was brought up by Trey, opened a bottle of red, more talk. And, you know, I was running around nearly writing lists of things he wanted me to do, so I was nearly back working for Tony as his PA again. About 10:30, it was kind of getting late. I could see he was getting tired. And I said, Tony, I've got to go. And I'll see you when I come back from China. And he got up, and it was a kind of the first time ever we embraced, you know, because Tony was not an embracer normally. And it was kind of an embrace to say goodbye. And that was it.
He was very weak. He coughed and he couldn't clear his throat or his chin, and I remember swabbing him with tissues and thinking how terribly sad it was that we should lose somebody like that. And you could see it ebbing away.
But Tony was a larger-than-life character, and Jim and I agreed that he needed a larger-than-life send-off. We had a tenor, beautiful floral arrangement, and we set the marquee up by the lake. Richard Corrigan provided all of the catering, and we got permission from Ryanair to fly one of their aircraft. We had the musicians and the tenor singing Ness and Dorma, and it was a very moving and beautiful occasion.
Three months after Tony's death, his son Cathal also died of cancer at 47. Tony's aviation legacy is carried on by his son Declan, with airline investments in the US, South America and Asia.
He has the legacy of making Ireland an aviation capital of the world. Half the aircraft that are on lease around the world are Irish registered, run by Irish leasing companies.
3 of the top 4 leasing companies in the world are headed up by ex-GPA alumni. Tony would have just loved that.
In exploding, it gave its molecules to the galaxy. It's an enormous contribution that Tony's made, and an Irish contribution to the global aviation scene.
His legacy also is Ryanair.
Without Ryanair, Poles would never have talked to the Portuguese. In fact, they wouldn't even know where Portugal was. And you would never have the movement of people, and therefore the transfer of cultures and everything else.
I think Tony would be completely at home with what we're planning to do now with Ryanair Labs and, you know, working with our customers. Prepare for outbound, manage your booking, online check-in, and all of this is going to be done across mobile technology. So in the past, we've just said, here, come on, make the booking go away. Now we'll be sending you messages, but only tailored messages. But it now has the lowest fares in Europe with this entire focus on how we can improve the customer experience. Now that we've built such a big and successful airline, I think a lot of what Tony wanted us to deliver, which was to be a bit nicer to customers, don't fight with everybody, has been vindicated.
Had great pride in the island of Ireland, and probably particularly for Tipperary. I mean, the Ryanair colours are the Tipperary colours. It goes pretty deep.
Moguls sometimes do not receive the credit that they deserve. I mean, I think that they are the heroes of modern Ireland in providing employment and a future for our people.
The drive and ambition sometimes may have detracted from his human side. And I think my father, being one of his closest friends, was kind of a little bit of collateral damage.
I prefer to remember Tony in his pomp when he was chief executive of GPA, when he was chairman of Ryanair, when he was floating around Lyons Estate like a 20th century Louis XV or Louis XVI, recreating the Tuileries Gardens and all that kind of stuff. He was a great man. I'm certainly the better for having met Tony Ryan. I think the whole of Ireland is better for Tony Ryan's life. He had his faults, but I think his successes and his contribution, certainly to Ireland, over the period of his lifetime, far outweighed the faults.
And next Tuesday at 9:35, in the last in this series, the late Pádraig O'Shea is remembered for his GAA success, his love of the Kingdom of Kerry, his graw for the Irish language and his overall lasting legacy. Next tonight, Miriam O'Callaghan is back with her